The Dignāga-Dharmakīrti system uses a two-membered proof. It has two members or two branches. Dharmakīrti, so Dharmakīrti was not alive during, he lived after Dharmakīrti. Dignāga lived, prior. Dignāga had become very popular, and Dharmakīrti took him on in many different ways. And one was his non-acceptance of the two-branched proof statement. Dharmakīrti, in his old-fashioned way, you could say, or even iconoclastic way of I'm not going to go along with you. He didn't use the term modern guys. I'm going to keep with what the general Indian way is, and it really is what the Nyayas were doing, which, as I've mentioned, is like sticking his finger in the eye, like a child, like I used to do with my mother. When she was naming things, I was an infant, tiny infant, and I would put my, hand on my forehead, and she'd say forehead, and I put my fingers here, and she'd say eyebrow, and then I knew this was sensitive if she'd say eye, but teasing. Put my finger more or less in her eye. But that's what I'm thinking of when I say Dharmakīrti would put his finger in Dignāga's eye repeatedly with many different points. I'm going to stick my finger in your eye. Give him a hard time, in other words. So he's sticking with the five-membered proof, which is, I think one can see, is kinder to the reader. It lays out the steps clearly. The two-membered proof statement, one could say, when you see all that's in it, one you say, wow, that's fantastic. If you want to word it pejoratively, you have crammed all five into the two. Or you've contained all, if you want to say it nicely, you've contained all five in the two. That's genius, or, it's really impressive, if you want to say it. Lauding Dignāga. So, thesis, entailment, exemplification, that means applying the example to your point. Just as a pot is a product, so a sound is a product. Therefore, and give the summary. Therefore, because the sound is a product, it is impermanent. Or, saying it a different way, thesis, sign. Sign, right? Same as reason, different word. demonstration of the entailment in an example. Translated very literally. It was really fantastic that Genin Lotra, from memory could easily lay this out for me, given that I hadn't gone through the school. Applying the example to the meaning, like a pod, a sound is also a product. Summary. Now, such a five-membered statement of proof, the Dignāga-Dharmakīrti, again Dharmakīrti coming later. So Dharmakīrti is a follower of Dignāga. You just got to drill this home. He's a follower of Dignāga, but he wasn't I'm trying to think of an actual student. Can you be an actual student and be a student after the person lived? In Tibetan you can say actual student means, Ngurlop in Tibetan means you weren't there when he was there. Okay? Came later. But in English, there's no one who was more of an actual student of Dignāga, even though he came later. I'm thinking of the fact that Kunjok Denpe Drame, though he lived later than Jayanshiva, is called one of his two sons. The great figure usually has two children, two sons, in this case, because they're male. Who is more of an actual son? The word, what does actual mean? But in Tibetan, so anyway, I like to use these terms the way they're used in Tibetan. So it's not that the whole thing is redundant, but there are certain members of the five-membered proof statement that are redundant because they can be contained in other members. So you can reduce the five to two. Those two are not redundant. In their school, a correct statement of proof has two members. Entailment, and you see the example is shoved into the entailment. You see, I'm using a little bit of a nasty word, but is put into the entailment. And then expression of the presence of the sign in the subject, right? The sign is the reason. A sound is also a product. I should be able to say something about the word also. I'm feeling inadequate. Now, we should say something about why sound is used. This statement is being said out to an Indian who holds that sound is permanent. If it's going to be said out to one of us, probably this is the wrong, we should say that a pot, it should start with A pot is impermanent because of being a product, like a sound, because it's obvious to us. You know, it's easier to realize that a sound is impermanent, right? Rather than a pot. Because you can snap your fingers and that sound disappears so quickly. Whereas a pot, right, this cup, it's the same one I used last time. I put my coffee in a brown cup. I worked a bit too hard this morning, so I didn't get a chance to nap. So I'm juicing myself with coffee. Juicing myself. Weird metaphor. In my brown cup, and I feel that's the same cup I used a few times ago when I was drinking coffee. Same cup. Same cup. That's the same sound I made as last time. Well, as we say that, snap the fingers, but you know damn well it's not the same sound. It's easier to know that it's not the same sound.
Just to check in and clarify, could I ask, is it, so is this now in terms of gross impermanence that you're saying?
Yeah, gross impermanence. Yeah.
And so, but the reason here is to realize subtle impermanence or gross impermanence or both?
Well, the reason here actually is to realize subtle impermanence. But if you use I'm saying, if you use an example from within gross impermanence that you can realize more easily, that you're going to have to use sound. Yeah. Clear enough? So sound is for now sound, and the Vedas are omnipresent because they're sound. Don't press me too hard about that. But anyway, the Vedas are sound, and they're omnipresent. Is any sound permanent? I mean, that's what I was saying earlier. And any sound, I believe, is permanent. Yes. I don't know how the Vedas sound as permanent is different from any sound being permanent. I don't know. And I don't know how you tune into, well, I'm going to word it pejoratively, all the clatter of sounds that are clattering, you know. You know how you tune into the Vedas. Yes.
Why is any sound permanent?
Why? In their system, in certain non-Buddhist, in the schools that follow the Vedas, because it's a quality of space. So even if the proof statement, which we're very familiar with, has these two elements, two members. Genenlotre, and I tried to think of what is this more complicated statement. And I added in formal classical debate. It's not our usual debate. This is not how the usual debate takes place. But maybe this is how it ought to take place. Or how we, if we get our, let's call hackles up. How we say, this is how it ought to. And I don't know, maybe I should have just said formal debate or formal classical debate. So first you start out with a consequence, as I've been saying. I mean, but then we'd end up debating everything with it follows that. And one of my, I don't want to be telling on my teachers, but one of my teachers said, well, the Indians didn't have Yimbar, it follows that Yimbartel. No, it's right there in the Sanskrit. And Nagarjuna uses it and so forth. But I'm not giving names. There's only one teacher, maybe. And I'm not saying I knew about it, it's my other Tibetan teachers who led me into anything that comes out of my mouth. I didn't somehow discover these things by myself.
May I ask, though, it's
Yes.
just the historical understanding, or as much as is known, like there wasn't the practice of debate that used the three-part consequence as, going back and forth between a challenger and defender sort of as a means of study like there is in the Tibetan system? Or is that not involved really?
There was a lot of debate, and there are stories about this person debating that person. And how they did it orally, I don't know. I do know that even nowadays, there is the oral speaking of Sanskrit. And one of my white teachers had gone to India and was taught in Sanskrit. And he learned to speak Sanskrit. And even though he was one of my Sanskrit teachers, I didn't learn from him to speak Sanskrit, although he spoke some Sanskrit to me, proving that I really enjoyed it. But I didn't get to that level. So I don't doubt really, I have the suspicion that when, for instance, in the second chapter of Nagarjuna's treatise on the middle, he uses prasadyate and prasadyate. I assume that this was in the oral culture also. And I assume that they debated that way too. But that's just my assumption. I don't know.
So the
Which comes in Tibetan as Yimbartel.
in the commonly cited, history or Chujung or whatever, that Chabachigi Senge was the founder of the Tibetan debate system, would you say that that's probably not founded then?
God, founder of the, that suggests me, I'm a bit shocked at that. That's a bit late, I would think. But it's just a reaction. Interesting. He certainly what I heard was he developed a version of debate in order to, believe it or not, put down women, the women debaters, yes, particularly Zedong, in order to spring it on the female, on the nuns, spring it on them and bring embarrassment to them and which struck me as exaggerated, because if they were so good at debating, they would learn it and knock down the monks in return. But it does strike me as the type of story that would be made up as a way to put down nuns. And that's when they stopped debating then for centuries. Until now. In which is absolutely fabulous to go to, for me to go to India this past fall in November and December, and to hear, well, it was a single nun in this case. She wasn't debating, but speak as forcefully and as fast and furious, you could say, in a way, but not furious, but as fast and as fluently and as loudly as any of the monks were, who were putting on the same kind of show when they were lecturing. She was lecturing as fast and furious as the younger of the monks were. Which is, with either of them, I was hanging in for words to figure out what they were talking about. I loved it. Wow. What I'm reflecting to is that the bullshit stories, gossip that I would hear at monasteries, just gossip, like when the Panchen Lama was passing through Los Angeles, and the gossip that I would hear about what was going on and so forth. Totally untrue stuff. It's the same as the bullshit stuff that one hears about in Washington, like about what goes on in the White House. It's no different. This small small place in the stories that gets put out. It's no different. No matter how much more communication supposedly there is in a place like Washington. Then you'll notice that her and his are used rather than in the other version. So what's nice about this version is that this one begins with the 5-membered proof statement. And this one, if we go on, permanent thing, I tried to get rid of that word thing. May as well, because of being permanent. This number 1, statement of a consequence, projecting a proof of the opposite. So at the end, she becomes a suitable vessel for the second step. And we've gone over a good bit of this. Impermanent thing is fine, or just the subject or product is impermanent would be enough, but impermanent thing is fine. So going to the next page, the mind explicitly realizing the entailment also implicitly realizes the counter-entailment. Entailment or pervasion. Uncompounded space, C. Space often means uncompounded space. There's the space that's the intermediate space, between me and my coffee cup. I'm thinking, I'm looking out at my coffee cup, and there's the space between my mouth and the cup, which I'm trying to pay attention to, because I'm thinking I shouldn't drink too much coffee, because I'll get heady. I'll get, a little bit spinny, a little bit dizzy. Is not a product. So that kind of space is, I think in the Consequentialist school, is a form, a type of form. Now, is it composed of particles? I don't know as it is. Oh, I'd have to look it up. So, you notice these sort of final statements here. No further proof is warranted. In other words, if you don't get the point, you don't need to give more reasons. But you could talk with the person about the reason that you have given to get it across. Or you could engage in activities like building rooms, adding rooms onto the house with Geshe Wangyo, or building a temple with Geshe Wangyo. And I had eliminated the next line. You see, whatever's a product is necessarily impermanent. Like, for example, a pot. A sound is also a product. This is the 2-membered proof statement of the Dignāga-Dharmakīrti school. These are the 2 members. Whatever's a product is necessarily impermanent. Like, for example, a pot. That's 1 member. The entailment or pervasion. A sound is also a product. This is the presence of the sign in the subject. The subject is sound, and product is the sign. Now I tried to change all instances of similar class and similar instances and dissimilar instances, which is vague and not a direct translation of the Tibetan, to similar class and dissimilar class. Tunchok in Tibetan, tunchok and dissimilar. And mintunchok. You got to cover the whole class. Instances could mean some instances and not other instances. It's all instances, the whole class. And you have to figure out where your interlocutor, where the other person is at. If you're going on if the person needs more instruction. If the person's sharp enough, more instruction isn't needed. This is, psychologically oriented. You're not just forcing something down the other person's throat, but you're figuring out where the other person is at, what the needs of the other person is. There's one of these where I missed instances and didn't change it to class. Then on to the next page.
Jeffrey, may I ask
Please.
a question? This one is more about just the English language compared with Tibetan.
Yes.
I'm wondering what you think of in terms of the article usage.
Yes.
Like if you say take the subject, a sound, it is impermanent.
Yes.
Versus take the subject, sound.
Yes.
An article, because like you're saying now, depending on where the person is at, well, feasibly you could hear the phrase a sound is impermanent to mean, okay, a sound is pleasant, but some other sound is unpleasant.
Yes.
A sound is permanent,
yes.
Another sound is permanent. So how do you indicate that it's the generality sound?
Yes.
All sound.
Yes. That it's going to go on to mean any sound. We spent a lot of time on this. From the very start. Sounds, a sound, and the fact that we spent a lot of time on it and settled on a sound doesn't mean that a sound is the best way of doing it. It's a misfortune in a way of English that generally speaking, we have to come up with something. It's a misfortune of English that you've got to come up with like he or she, you can't just leave identification of gender out of it. Ko in Tibetan can serve as male or female. And by using pot, a pot, the pot, pots, using all of them, we found all of them awkward. And maybe in every book there should be a statement to this effect. Work up a good paragraph, a good few sentences, so that, it's just, that's lobbed into every book. Yeah. That says it well. That no matter what's used, if it's sound, if it's a sound, yeah. That it never means this one and not others. Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing it up. It's as if we thought, now that we've figured out what for us is the best one, we could get away with just doing it our way without explaining it. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. So, restatement is a very interesting one. And I'll forever remember Gendon Lotra at his desk in what's called the seminar. It's not a seminar, it's in English. The department in Hamburg. A simultaneous awareness of the three modes of the reason, its presence in the subject, for generating the moment a simultaneous awareness. Tuchik to tremba, tembe, lo. A mind apprehending the sign. In Tibetan, Danzin Sim, and is the direct cause of the inferring consciousness realizing that a sound is impermanent. Now, the second party in a debate, the second party has the wrong view. And as you see, I'm scanning, so to speak. I'm Nemoto, Hiroshi Nemoto, or Nemoto Hiroshi, as one would say it in Japan. Hiroshi Nemoto said, even though we translate the Tibetan word yanda, chigo yanda, it's very hard because to translate this as a correct second party or opponent, correct opponent, because the opponent isn't correct. You know, a correct reason, a correct sign is correct. But the opponent isn't correct. It's the same word. And so I worked up the term a full-fledged opponent, a full-fledged second party. I forget what he worked up as a substitute for correct. And then he wanted to use, instead of using a correct reason, he was using that term instead of correct reason or correct sign. And I think in the end, we used two terms, correct reason and full-fledged opponent or second party, full-fledged. You know, had all of the qualifications for being an opponent. Well, when you can see in that she is prepared for the basic reasoning that a sound is an impermanent thing becoming a product. So then you state the basic syllogism. The subject sound is impermanent because of being a product. The then full-fledged second party realizes that a sound is impermanent. Or, for us, it's got to be that a pot or that my body is impermanent, after which I cease to be a second party because of having finished realizing the thesis. You know, I'm no longer an opponent. I'm not a full-fledged opponent. We used to say correct opponent. You know, the right opponent for this. But you can easily miss right. You know, the opponent isn't right. The opponent's wrong. But this is the right opponent for this reasoning. But he had a good point that, you know, he's part of our translation institute. So we've changed it. It's not a correct, or, yeah, I should have eliminated a correct, a full-fledged second party. Should have just eliminated. Yeah. The actual prescribed mode of debate, or, yeah, I should have repeated here, formal classical mode of debate involves many more. And there's this very important state about what how the consequence school gets its name, consequence, because you can see that the first step in it's actually not just the formal mode, formal classical mode, but the usage, both in debate and in meditation, is to state to the other person or to yourself a consequence of your own absurd holding on to the wrong view. So the consequence, the usage of consequences is fundamental to, I assume also even in the Great Exposition School, because after all, the way it's put, the Great Exposition School is put forward is following Vasubandhu, is to is to use a consequence first of all. So what's different in the consequence school? It's that for a sharp person, the statement of a consequence alone to yourself or to another sharp, to yourself if you're sharp, and to another person if that person is sharp, is sufficient to generate an inference realizing the thesis. It doesn't have to be rephrased. Okay. Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.